Hello, podcast listener. This is your host with the most, and I'm telling you to be excellent to each other because we're going to break down Bill and Ted Face the Music. Spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert. Do not listen to this podcast if you have not watched Bill and Ted Face the Music because we're going to give away not only plot points, but also great little moments in here. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode if you've watched Bill and Ted Face the Music. And by the way, if you'd like to help support our podcast, visit jjmeetsworld.com where you can donate to our Patreon, pick up some killer swag at our merch shop, or click the link to Apple Podcast and give us a 5-star review.
1, 2, 3, 4. J.J. Gordon, sort of like that Indiana Jones, in that he's always sniffing out his next adventure. Yes, he is. He's always interviewing guests so he can have them on his show and they can talk about pop culture, arts, and leisure. J.J. has his flag unfurled and he likes his french fries curled, and he's fun and then he twirled as he goes to meet the world. He will march into the rain even if his ankle sprained. Take a peek inside his brain. This podcast is called J.J. Meets World.
There is something to be about nostalgia that I am really into right now. And in this episode of JJ Meets World, we're going to talk about Bill and Ted Face the Music, the third film in the Bill and Ted saga. And I immediately was into this film in just an intense way when the Orion home video logo popped up. Now, if you've ever seen it, it's a starry sky, and then a bunch of the stars come together to form the O for Orion. It is a relic of the 1980s, and I am so glad that that is how this movie started. My wife and I have this game where, since we both worked at video stores for a long time, we like to test each other and see if the first person who can name the movie. So if we happen to be watching HBO or something, and a movie comes on and it's the Lionsgate logo and you're listening for the first maybe note of score that's going to get you there. And we always have this fun little game where we play where we have to name what the movie it was. And now seeing the Orion logo before a movie that's released in 2020 really, oh my God, that just tickled me in a way I cannot even tell you.
It made me almost wish I was watching the movie on VHS.
A little bit, right?
Yeah.
You wanted just a little bit. And it's a grainy, it's not a high def. They
Right.
haven't redone this logo
Right.
like Universal has in a nice new version.
In fact, recently I've been kind of getting into the idea of getting VHS tapes again because I was able to rescue my old CRT monitor from TV from the lakes and was watching some of my favorite VHS tapes. And I was like, God, this really brings back the memories. I would almost like to get a copy of this movie on VHS. I might have to just dub my digital copy onto a VHS tape. So I've got that.
Surprised iMovie doesn't have a feature like VHS this thing to make it look like it. But this movie is full of nostalgia, but also being brand new. To me, trilogies are it's something wholly unique to the movie genre. And today we talk about franchises more than we talk about trilogies because you want to have this giant franchise and you want to have just all this other stuff going around. But to me, there is something really great watching a movie trilogy. Some of my favorites, Back to the Future, Indiana Jones, because there is no fourth Indiana Jones. You'll never convince me otherwise.
No, it doesn't exist.
Another great, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, because I don't want to think that they turned The Hobbit into a trilogy. It didn't need to be.
Nope.
And there are just some great movies out there that have 3 acts. And here's the thing. Nailing the third, the threequel, is one of the most difficult things that happens in Hollywood. So, for example, Spider-Man, awesome. Spider-Man 2, oh my God, it's good. Spider-Man 3, what?
Yep, doesn't exist.
Right. It just goes. So the fact that they have a Bill and Ted that comes out more than 30 years from when the first one was released is a testament, unto itself. Now, I also want to say, spoiler alert. If you have not watched Bill and Ted Face the Music, stop listening to this podcast right now and do not come back to it until after you've watched the movie. Even if you're one of those people who's like, I don't care if I kind of know the plot before I watch the movie. Please, that is it will not ruin your movie going experience, but that's not what the creators, that's not what all the people who worked so hard on this movie wanted, was for you to listen to a podcast about it and then watch it.
I mean, there are some, we talk about all the best jokes though, right?
Yeah.
And all of the things, all the jokes in this movie caught me off guard and made me laugh really, really hard. And I don't want to rob anyone else of that. So consider this podcast your digestive process. Once you've watched the movie and you and your friends have talked about it, now listen to our friends talk about it.
Right. I also have a feeling that this movie has provided Tucker with who he's going to go as for Halloween this year. I think that he can start working on that costume right now. So I don't want to waste any more time. I want to get right into this thing. Dr. Greg Carlson joins us. If you haven't listened to our previous Bill and Ted podcast, it's just the last episode. So just, go out of this and go back one and listen to that episode for full enjoyment of this, our breakdown of Bill and Ted Face the Music, a weekend of release based podcast. So enjoy. Party on.
JJ Meets World.
Bill and Ted Face the Music. I guess I wouldn't necessarily call this a review podcast. I think I would call it a culmination podcast to just talk about what this movie kind of meant to us and how we felt about it. Released on Friday on VOD and in select theaters. This is the first big anticipated release of the summer to kind of try that model with some frame of success, I feel, because I saw a lot of people who on social media talked about this movie right away on Friday. So we're reuniting the team from the last Bill and Ted's podcast. Of course, my good friend, producer Tucker Lucas, and Dr. Greg Carlson joins us as well. And let's start with this. How did everybody consume their Bill and Ted? Because at my house, we finally got a nice screen and a projector and a new surround sound system that I really wanted to break in with Bill and Ted. And so I had as close to a theater experience. In fact, I'm pretty sure I've seen screens smaller than the one. Like I've paid $20 to see a movie on a screen smaller than what I had. But we did it kind of like a movie theater experience where we popped popcorn upstairs. Jill even hung an exit sign for in case of emergency. We watched a Greg Marcus clip that's on YouTube to welcome us to the theater.
You went the extra mile. That's good.
Yeah, right. We really wanted it to feel like it was a movie. And we also did something that we don't normally do at home. Both of Jill and I have an appreciation for film, but at home we kind of gotten into this routine of like just having our phones nearby just in case. But we left the phones upstairs in the kitchen to make sure that we were not distracted one bit. And we actually sent my dogs home to Hillsboro with my in-laws. So there were no distractions. There was no need for a potty break, nothing. And we both said, let's go to the bathroom beforehand. So we're not even pausing it. We wanted as pure of an experience as we could get. And we had a good time. And I rented it. I didn't buy it. I rented it on Amazon Prime. And they also had some featurette pieces that came with it. So I was able to watch that. Greg, how did you experience Bill and Ted?
My entire family, we being Katie and Forrest and Violet, my wife and my two children, we watched it together in our family room on our 4K screen. So it was the VOD experience. I'm also working on a home theater, but it's not operational yet. So we watched it in the afternoon, and when we watch a movie as a family, we also have a prohibition on electronic devices. So everyone leaves their iPads and iPhones and other devices away from the place where we're watching. We will pause if someone needs a bathroom break, typically. So it was not the perfect theater condition, but we were all on board and engaged.
What about you, Tucker?
So my experience was much different than you two's. So I decided to go through YouTube to buy it. Because when I looked at the list of places where you could buy it, I was like, oh, well, YouTube seems like a good choice. Let's go with that. So I paid on YouTube. You could rent it for $20 and buy it for $25. So like, well, I'll just buy it. It's another $5, and then at least I have it, and maybe extra special stuff comes with it. But for some reason, I could only get the 480p version of it. Like the stream didn't even offer an HD option. And I refreshed the window multiple times to think maybe it's just because I just purchased it and it takes a second. No, the highest quality version I had access to was 480p. So I watched it in 480p. And instead of creating a whole cinema experience, I just sat at my computer and watched it because it was 480p. And I needed to I actually watched it as a window in a browser on a computer just because that was the version I paid for, and I didn't see any special features that came with it.
Did your cats enjoy it?
My cats fell asleep, luckily, before anything really happened. So,
what time of the day did you watch it, Tucker?
This was last night.
Okay.
So this would have been 8:00. And here's the thing: I did go do. I went and I got myself a pizza.
Okay.
Because I was I'm gonna have a pizza while I watch this, and the pizza was of a higher definition than the movie was.
Jill was cool enough. She was like, should we make Ziggy Piggies before the start? And so we did a little bit of ice cream right after dinner.
What all goes into a Ziggy Piggy?
It looks like it's just a ton of scoops of ice cream. I mean, if you look at it, yeah, it's just a gigantic bowl of ice cream. And so we each had a bowl of ice cream for dessert before we watched the movie.
Your heart's in the right place just by calling it the Ziggy Piggy.
Right, exactly.
Because
in fact,
that was the Matheson Solomon original cameo was during the Ziggy Piggy, and we'll get to it. But I really am glad that the gentleman came back for a cameo in this one.
So let's start with this. And Greg, correct me on his name, but Dean, is it Parasot or is it Parisot?
Yeah,
is it
I think it's
French?
Parisot. So I'm going to pronounce. I don't know, but I'm going to pronounce it the French way.
Okay, that's what I was thinking too.
We'll call him Dean Parisot.
So Dean Parisot, the director of this, who, when you really look at his IMDb page, has not done a lot of theatrical features. He's done a ton of television, including some Reading
TV.
Rainbow episodes.
Yeah, Curb Your Enthusiasm, I think, is on there. I don't have his page up in front of me, but I'm trying to recall Northern Exposure.
He
directed
that Chris Elliott show that Get a Life.
I'll bring up the old IMDb here, guys.
But he does have one of my favorite adventure films.
I know it.
Right? Galaxy Quest is one of his. And I saw some nice shades of Galaxy Quest in Bill and Ted Face the Music. This guy, and Home Fries is another one that he did. Way less adventure or, weighty as far as whether or not the world's going to exist after the end of the movie. But I thought, it's interesting, like, that as a director, he's not somebody who comes from a music video background or something that's been heavily influenced by music, being that this Bill and Ted film was going to focus so much on music itself.
Yeah, it looks like his bona fides are primarily TV. Before Bill and Ted, it was for movies. It was Red 2 in 2013, and then he did Fun with Dick and Jane, which I think was Jim Carrey in 2005, and then before that was Galaxy Quest. So almost everything else he has here are all episodes of TV shows, from Good Girl, Santa Clarita Diet, Grace and Frankie, Justified, Good Wife, Modern Family, Monk.
So he's making a movie like every 7 to 8 years, pretty much.
Pretty much.
That's his deal.
But just crunching through episodic, like an industry veteran. We should note too that he was married for a long time until her death to Sally Menke, the collaborator of Quentin Tarantino, Quentin Tarantino's editor.
Okay.
I also think that, too, this movie has been in development for a very long time. Of course, they wanted a third Bill and Ted after Bogus Journey. It just didn't work out that way. At one point, Keanu Reeves said, nope, I'm going to do different things with my career. He didn't want to just be Ted. And at one point you kind of wonder like, well, do we even need this movie anymore? But what I love is the fact that it took so long to get there, influenced the story directly. And I think that if we had gotten a third Bill and Ted, like let's say like in 95 or 96, I don't know if it would have been as good as this is, if I'm going to be honest.
I agree. I like the nostalgia dimension of it is appealing to me, and the kind of passing the idea that Winter and Reeves were not interested in a reboot, that this is in universe. Matheson and Solomon delivered the goods in that regard, that if there is any kind of passing of the torch, it is to the daughters of Bill and Ted, who are fantastic.
Yeah, they're the highlight of the film.
Without a doubt.
They're definitely the highlight of the film. And
great performances by both. I really enjoyed their storyline.
Yeah, so Bridget Lundy Payne plays Ted's daughter. And
I don't know her. She
Weaving.
Also does like episodic TV stuff, right? Is she on a Netflix series or something?
Looks like
I don't know her. I don't know her work. This was the first time that I was that I had a chance to see her perform that I noticed. I guess I saw she was in a small role in what was that Johnny Knoxville movie? His most recent one.
The Action Park ripoff one?
Action Point.
Action Point. Was she in that? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, her character name is Four Finger Annie, which is a great name.
Which sounds, terrible. I mean, it sounds like it could mean any number of things.
It looks like her regular gig is working on a TV series called Atypical. So yeah, she's got a fairly small. Most of her movie roles look like they're bit parts. So this is sort of one of her first. Leading.
Well, and
parts.
I mentioned last time we were talking about the upcoming movie that I love, Samara Weaving. Or Samara, I'm not sure how she pronounces her first name, in Ready or Not, which was awesome. And then I think JJ, you mentioned seeing her in some other stuff.
Yeah, The Babysitter on Netflix, which I just saw is getting a sequel as well. I think, and she's somebody too who also she was on a Showtime series for just a little bit, who I really think understands comedy and is kind of willing to go all out when it comes to comedy. And I thought, Greg, I can't agree more with you that both of these actors really got into these roles. And rather than doing like an impression of what what Winters and Reeves did in the first two movies, they really brought this onto their own. Like, I think of the moment when we first see Kelly, Rufus's daughter, arrive in what is, would be considered present time, and they're both watching out the window, wide-eyed that the future's there, but they're still eating Cheetos while they're doing it. I thought was really, like, there's something about that like really tickled me, how they're both just staring, but yet their hands can still reach in the Cheetos bag and eat Cheetos at the same time.
Well, and I love the fact that they're each named after their dad's best friend.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So Ted named his daughter after Bill, and Bill named his daughter after Ted.
That's just so perfect.
So let's get into this movie as a whole, because I gotta be honest, this movie kind of stuck with me for a while, and I'm not gonna lie, I got a little teared up at the end. And to me, watching this movie, I was ready for this movie to not be great, if I'm going to be honest. Because, you just kind of, there were a lot of people who said, do we really need a third Bill and Ted movie? And the approach that they take to this movie, has a lot of questions. And also, I am dumbfounded at how perfectly timed it is for what's going on in this pandemic world that we're living in, and the story of how kind of music heals and unites people. I mean, did they know that this was going to happen? Because doesn't it feel, did they edit pieces at one point? But it just felt like this is kind of the movie that the world needs right now.
Right. Well, it does. So the Bill and Ted series seems to do this thing where it feels like it is a part of that universe. It does feel like a sequel. There are things that get revisited, like gags and stuff. but they're always able to find something new about it. And the characters even kind of joke about that because now it's not just all time, it's all reality as well. I think there's a character who's like, oh, is that a new thing now too? It's like, yeah, that's a new part of this too. I was not expected to fall in love with a futuristic murder robot named Dennis Caleb McCoy.
Oh, it's great.
Anthony Carrigan plays him, who's another, like, he's done a little bit of work in Gotham, a couple of TV shows, but not a ton of stuff.
He's prominent in that Bill Hader show where Bill Hader plays an assassin. Barry, yeah. And he actually might be the best part of Barry.
But having Dennis Caleb McCoy come in, it's in the tradition of how Death was such a breakout star in Bogus Journey, right? And Death is still here and gets his due and has some amazing moments. But now when Dennis Caleb McCoy just makes me keep thinking of the Death character, how he fit into Bogus Journey. They were able to figure out a new way to revisit the same sort of idea. Someone who is initially going to be like a nemesis or a antagonist to the heroes, but then ends up actually being really sweet and joining the team. Especially when I laughed so hard when mistakes were made. when he realizes that they found the song and he had just lasered their daughters to hell.
Yep. So also and that's so well put because I laughed out loud too, using lasered as a verb and saying that I lasered them to hell. He is a breakout character in the movie, and I completely agree with everything that you said, Tucker. He was just at first you see him come on as this kind of Terminator, there to eliminate and be an obstacle in the evolution of the mechanics of the plot. But then, once he reveals his name and we find out that he's sort of a gentle, more insecure kind of figure that wants to be part of the group, that was just another flower blooming in the garden of this particular movie.
And the fact that he was named after Kristen Schall's ex-boyfriend by her mother, and then it seems that they're potentially hooking up towards the end. It's not really explicitly said, but it's intimated that she's already taking him on as a new Dennis Caleb McCoy in her life.
Okay, so let's just we'll briefly go over like the first half of the movie, and then we can work on that. So, Bill and Ted have not achieved the international destiny of uniting the world through one amazing song. They talk about how during, like, right after the events of Bogus Journey, they were like, they were doing great. And then they hit their plateau. And like every great band that starts at county fairs, you also end at county fairs.
Right.
And so we take up with Bill and Ted to the point of where things are not going the way that they had imagined it going. They are having marital troubles. And there's a really tender scene where they're just sitting in the garage and Ted's discussing the fact that he's going to sell his Les Paul.
Yeah.
And at that moment, Kelly arrives, Kelly, the daughter of Rufus, and says, well, I need to take you to the future to talk to them. Bill and Ted very excited because, of course, as Bill says, he goes, they love us in the future. And so they go to the future to meet the supreme, not the supreme leader, but the great leader, played by Holland Taylor. And they're ripped a new one for not having achieved what they're supposed to, and they're given a deadline of when this is supposed to happen. You also get a moment that is really nice where they pay tribute to George Carlin as a hologram, and they use archival footage from the first one, and then there's a guy who does more voice work and does a really convincing Carlin impression.
Yeah.
To do off-screen voiceover as they're walking away from this hologram. And so Bill and Ted start on their journey to figure out how to get this song so that by 7/17 at MP46 they are ready to go. And I will say this, the princesses get pulled into this, and there's travel for them. There's travel for Bill and Ted. Their daughters want to help. And yeah, I was writing down a note, and I said, in the first movie, you follow Bill and Ted for 95% of the movie, with the exception of cutting back to Napoleon every now and then.
Right.
In the second movie, you follow Bill and Ted probably 80% of the time, because it cuts back to evil Bill and Ted in the present trying to mess things up. In this movie, I mean, you're really talking about probably 50% Bill and Ted, and then 50% other adventures between the daughters and the princesses. And so you get more storylines in this movie than you have in either of the previous two. And I'm not sad about that.
No, not at all. In fact, since we're talking about the first part of the movie, we can't go without mentioning the opening scene, which is jam-packed with wonderful callbacks to the series.
And Missy.
Missy now marrying, is it Deacon?
It's Ted's younger brother.
Yeah, Ted's younger brother. Which is great, because they do the kind of classic joke, about being your own grandfather or your own son in this case. And all the different interfamilial entanglements that they have. But what I liked about that scene, in addition to the callback humor to the franchise, was that the music theme is kind of a bookend. So the Tuvan throat singing and the theremin playing and that crazy song that they do is actually, to me, it's indicative of this kind of holistic approach to, music of all kinds kind of coming together, Ted pulling out the trumpet, them just sort of throwing everything at the wall before Captain Jonathan Logan pulls the plug, literally on the performance. So I really like that. I like the way the movie opened at the wedding.
I also love the fact that Beck Bennett, by the way, plays Deacon. Beck Bennett is one of those guys who I feel like I laugh every time I see him on screen, and he also does the voice of Launchpad McQuack in the new DuckTales series. To me, he kind of plays the perfect idiot.
He is really good. Is he? He's written or writes for SNL. Is he a cast member too?
Yeah. So he's appeared several times as I don't know if he's technically a cast member. Or if he's a supporting player.
Well, he was one of the main performers in their parody of the Pepsi commercial, and he was fantastic in that. And he has this. He's also in the David S. Pumpkins skit. He's in the elevator,
right?
And
he's a great straight man.
He's a great straight man, but he's not a boring straight man. Like you see, he also he can play a total prick. He can play a frat boy, but he can also play the exact opposite of that. He's got a lot of range to him.
This Deacon, this iteration of Deacon, now we see him as a grown up, and there's just enough dialogue to show that he's a little twisted under the surface. That he's enjoying the fact that he is now married to
his former stepmom,
former stepmother, and so that that comes through, when they're calling each other pet names, and he reveals that he actually likes that.
Yeah, I mean, you have to imagine that at one point during the writing session, they're like, "Well, what are we gonna do with Missy? Like, maybe she's married to Deacon," and the kind of aha moment, they must have had a list of okay, who does Missy get married to in this one? Now that we've set this precedent of she's got to be married to somebody else, intertwined.
It's quite the journey that Missy has gone on, because I think of the scene from Excellent Adventure when Bill's dad is going to hook up with her in Bill's room.
Bill's room, yeah, gives him some money,
and just that look on Bill's dad's face. I mean, that's pretty creepy. Like in especially in watching it through the context of today, I rewatched that scene and I was like, "Oof, that's kind of uncomfortable." And now it's at this point where they've just amped it up to the she's just moving from family member to family member. Right. I mean, Bill and Ted are family. They're not related, but they are definitely family. And
Yep.
it was the perfect starting payoff. I think it was the perfect out the gate joke to really kick it off.
I'm also really glad too that they got the original Missy back
Yeah.
to continue that role.
Is it Stoach or Stoke? Stoch. Stoke?
I don't know. That's a good Amy Stokes. She's used other names, I think, too.
She's gone by Amy Stock Poynton, so it must be Stock. But she spelled it Stock-Poynton. Of course, I'm reading the internet. I'm not this isn't just knowledge I have in my
Thank
head.
God for the internet.
Your auto auto knowledge, your deep knowledge of secondary players.
Right.
Because I'm not sure, what is she most known for other than Missy?
The Bill and Ted stuff is her biggest stuff. She's done a lot of TV movies.
She was also in Summer School.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
As Kim.
One of my favorite TBS features to watch on 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Okay, so Bill and Ted, they get the quest, right? They're given the mission from like the time council or whatever you would call them.
And just like the first movie, there is a finite deadline that is approaching quickly in San Dimas. Also, I want to call this out real quick. It never really dawned on me, but like San Dimas becomes the capital of the world because when they go to the future, it notes that they're still in San Dimas in like 2720, so 700 years in the future. And that never dawned on me that like became so popular, like the world built around them in this tiny Southern California town.
You could argue that it's the capital of reality.
Yes.
At this point of all time and space.
Yeah, exactly.
So we progress. They get their quest, and they think an easy way would be like, well, we'll just go to the future and we'll figure out, what we did, and then we'll bring it back here.
Get it from ourselves.
To me, once the adventure starts here, and you start kind of seeing everyone play with time in that way, it goes relatively quickly.
Yeah.
This is not a movie that I feel like has a lot of dead weight to it. There aren't like long sequences. Like when I rewatched Excellent Adventure, they were maybe in the knight's armor for maybe like 30 seconds too long. Like at one point I'm like, okay, I'm done with, I get it. You're clanking the swords. Okay. But there is no dead time in this movie at all. It is very fast paced.
The runtime is an hour 31, so that's perfect especially by Greg's standards. I know 90 minutes, Greg, is sort of your breaking point.
That's what
I love a 90-minute movie, and it's my favorite length of a movie. It's got to be under 100 minutes to really knock it out of the park for me. And I think that's a hallmark of the Bill and Ted movies. Are not all three of them in that sort of 90-minute? Maybe the longest one is well, we'd have to look that up. I can't tell you off the top of my head.
I'm on it.
Okay, here
it's funny you say that, Greg, about 90 minutes because my wife feels the same. She goes, if you can't tell a story in 90 minutes, you don't need to tell it.
And
excellent,
JJ,
Excellent Adventure is 90 minutes on the nose, and Bogus Journey is an hour 33. Yep. So
there you go.
Yeah. So we're right in there, and what JJ alluded to earlier, that there was a kind of tender character scene, the selling the Les Paul scene, the kind of facing up to your failures and disappointments, and maybe thinking about giving up on a dream and moving on. There were a number of those moments in Face the Music that I really appreciated, especially the post-credits, kind of Easter egg scene with the deathbeds. And they ask each other if they're dead yet, and they're not. So they can kind of creak their bones out of their nursing home spots to where they have already their amplifiers set up to jam, to shred a little bit. And I thought that was great.
That one of the hallmarks of the whole series is the purity of their friendship. Like at no point is it ever really truly challenged. I mean, you could say that obviously it's devastating. It's devastating to find out that their wives are going to leave them, but it's almost more devastating that Ted's going to sell his Les Paul, right? That the band.
Well, Tucker, that's a really good point in this idea of wondering whether Matheson and Solomon, they must have been tempted along the way to do the classic trope, the buddy movie trope, where there's a rift, and they say, it's the Pineapple Express moment, screw you, no screw you, and we're gonna break up. And the purity of Bill and Ted's friendship is so strong that brilliantly executed scene with Jillian Bell is a highlight in the movie. Is trying to get them to think of themselves as individuals rather than as a we.
Mm-hmm.
And note too in the language of Bill and Ted throughout the series that the mangled grammar is deliberate and purposeful. So it's always it's us's. It's not I love they talk about robot us's, or in this case we got to see a whole bunch of great character work. The prison us's were hilarious. The Dave Grohl mansion us's were hilarious. I loved what Winter and Reeves did with the characters in those scenes.
Right.
I do think there is one thing that was really tempting in this movie. Because really this is the first movie that is actually focused on music,
right,
as a big aspect. You have Battle of the Bands and Bogus Journey. You've got the fact that they're trying to launch their band in Excellent Adventure, but this is the first one for two rockers. This is the first one that actually involves music in a lot of ways, unless you count, two heads are better than one playing like 6 times during Excellent Adventure. Now, to me, the temptation there was, well, let's put a lot of musicians in this movie.
Right.
And so, like, I don't really know who Kid Cudi is because I don't follow current music. I'm more of an Edison Lighthouse kind of guy. And then, and Dave Grohl, and a couple of things that to me kind of dates the movie. This will be what dates this movie ultimately. Whereas, like, the thing that dates Excellent Adventure and Bogus Journey is the use of a phone booth, to a 20th century or 21st century viewer. And
that's a really good point.
Yeah, because like in 5 years, who we worship as music gods might completely be different. So think if this movie was made in 1997, do they end up on a Spice? Are they opening for the Spice Girls?
So Chumbawamba.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so I think that's something that's always really difficult. And, you saw it too with the Tenacious D movie, where it's a movie about rock and roll. And so they want to shove all of these rockers in there. And for them, it was classic rock. So you're getting Dio to appear on the poster on the back of a bedroom wall. And, I don't have anything against Dave Grohl. I actually think he's probably one of the best human beings. He's a real life Bill and Ted unite people through music. So I thought that was wonderful. But,
that his cameo made sense.
It really did. But like for me, Kid Cudi didn't mean anything to me.
I think, that's a good point, that Gen Xers are not as connected to an artist like Kid Cudi, who would be more recognizable to, a younger generation. And so this idea of nostalgia, I know that through the development of the script, the idea of who, and I'm not saying that it would be the role that Kid Cudi came to inhabit, because I thought he was really funny, sort of having a working knowledge of time travel paradoxes, and bring that out into the dialogue that Bill and Ted are incapable kind of fully grasping or understanding. They're just kind of doing their usual nod and smile.
Yeah, I don't mean to be
Eddie Van
rude, but we've
Halen-
got 4 minutes at the end when Keanu's trying to get Cudi to explain, infinite time paradoxes and how they can get everyone to have instruments at the same time. But go ahead, Greg.
Yeah. So, Eddie Van Halen, who, featured as one of the Bill and Ted kind of signature bands. We know that, Ted wore a Van Halen t-shirt, and there were lots of references to Van Halen earlier. So I know at one point in time, Matheson and Solomon intended to enlist or convince Eddie Van Halen to do a cameo so that Bill and Ted could meet one of their heroes. But it's definitely, a number of critics have noted that the subplot, the B plot with the daughters putting together this ultimate band is kind of, I think it was especially in the Hollywood Reporter assessment of the movie, was calling attention to kind of setting things right, because moving away from purely kind of white men, with a lot of Europeans thrown in there, to we still have our Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart instead of Beethoven, or Beethoven, but Ling Lun, they gender swap that historical figure, which is great because we don't care about historical accuracy in Bill and Ted movies, and so it made sense to have the band not be all men, for instance. And that's why I wondered, if I was rewriting this movie from a Gen Xer standpoint, instead of Kid Cudi, I might have cast like Missy Elliott, or Lauryn Hill, or someone like that.
I believe the daughters make reference to the flautist. What's her name?
Yeah, Ling Lun.
Ling Lun. They say like, oh, that's right, the rumors were true.
Yes, that's correct.
That
that's
it was
correct.
historically inaccurate that this was a male character. I love the notion that they're basically each musician they're getting is like one of the favorite musicians of the musician they got beforehand, right? So
that's cool.
So Mozart is geeking out at the fact that it's Ling Lun, right? And Ling Lun is who wants to get her like favorite percussionist,
Yep.
right? Who is is working on the Welt somewhere. And that they're basically just going and getting the hero of the previous one before them, so that there's these great moments where I like that Mozart is constantly speaking in German and we never get subtitles to what he's saying, but you understand what he's sort of talking about.
Right.
And I also love how quickly, even though it takes some time to get Hendrix on board, but how quickly these musicians just sort of buy into the notion of, oh, time travel. All right, let's do it. Let's go save reality. Let's get the band together. I don't want to jump too quickly to the end, but I think the only thing that I was really disappointed in the movie was that there's all this build up to this song that comes in at the end. And the song itself that we end up hearing is fairly underwhelming as music goes. At first, it sounded like they were doing a Prince tribute with Purple Rain, but it's a much different melody. And at first I thought, oh, are they just all singing Purple Rain? But then it became this totally different thing. And I was hoping that we would be getting something pretty fantastic at the end, but I don't have to skip us to the end. I was on that thread because of the ultimate band that they get together.
Tucker, you bring up an excellent point, because I had anxiety through this entire movie of how are they going to have a song in this movie that is so good. In fact, I thought, well, maybe what it is like they're all united and they're all ready, and 717 hits, and they like, you even hear the first like strum and then it goes to credits. I thought, is there a mechanic that they can use so that they don't actually have to tell us what this song is, but in a way, like, you need to find this song for yourself, like in the same way that we're like when they go to the future to find everything. And excuse me, just the whole time I'm sitting there panicking, being like, God, are they going to have something that is so good that it sticks with you forever, and that, this is going to be a must download soundtrack? And I don't feel like I was disappointed in the last song, but I also don't. I feel like if you listen to that without the visuals and without the story beforehand,
right,
it doesn't mean anything to you.
It becomes more about the fact that all of reality plays the song at the same time,
yes,
versus it being this amazing song. But we do get a pretty great gag with the Dave Grohl thing, where they think they're listening to the song that unites humanity. It's the best song he's ever heard, and it turns out no, it's just a song that Dave Grohl wrote,
yeah.
And the future us's stole it and tried to pass it off as a Bill and Ted song.
Yeah.
What did you guys think of Future Us's?
So Future Us's was so great because just like, revisiting things from previous Bill and Ted movies, but finding a new way to approach it. They did that really, really well. Where again, and they do some great meta commentary where Ted says something to the effect of, "Yeah, I never seem to get along with the other me's." He's always in some kind of conflict. He's always the one that's, when the robot us's show up in Bogus Journey, he's the one that feels something weird about it. He's the one that's always testing them. Like, what number am I thinking? What number am I about to hold up right now? And so you get those gags, but we were able to get a variety of new versions of evil Bill and Ted that were also motivated, right? They weren't just being evil.
Yes,
they wanted to
agreed.
get their wives back and their lives.
Yeah,
back.
when I had mentioned earlier, the seeing, I think we or on the previous podcast we talked about, Winter showing up in the heavy makeup as the granny in Hell, and how great that is. What is the name of that character?
Granny Preston.
JJ?
Oh, in Bill and Ted Face the Music?
No, in Bogus.
It's Granny Preston.
Yeah, Granny Preston, right? And so, the Winter is just especially adept at that. I mean, Reeves is wonderful as well, especially when we see the senior citizen, elderly future versions of them. They both look great. But I love the prison versions, and then the fact that they had that it was wigs. They were sort of covering up their physical flaws, with that mirrored their ethical and moral flaws. So when present time Bill and Ted walk in on them, Ted has his gut hanging out, and Bill has a wispy hair underneath his heavy metal hair. That was great.
To me, it's the makeup and costuming effects were perfect because they were kind of done haphazardly. Like you think of like the muscle suits, right? Where they look ridiculous, but that's kind of part of the charm of the whole thing. Is I love, like in Be Kind Rewind, how they made costumes, but it looks like if someone had like an hour to make a Ghostbusters costume, what can you come up with that's already in your closet?
Yeah.
And so I appreciate that. Greg, let's kind of briefly talk a little bit about the princesses, because they're recast again. And this time they brought in some more notable actresses, and so the second that I saw that these two women had been cast, I knew that they were going to beef up the role for this movie, and I think that is an interesting adventure as well, because they're talking about leaving Bill and Ted, and I just they are out of time more than any other character in this movie, and I really like that they fleshed them out a little bit more.
I did too. It's in one sense, we don't know the historical reasons for recasting the princesses in each movie. We touched on it in the previous discussion that we had, because I'm such a huge Diane Franklin fan. Last American Virgin is one of my favorite 80s teen movies, just favorite movies, period. And so I noted in some of the reviews that there was some criticism about the casting, the recasting of the princesses, suggesting that they were, so much younger than the actors playing Bill and Ted, which isn't, entirely true. We know that Erin Hayes, for instance, is 44 years old, so she's in the ballpark, right? In other words, the criticism is that in Hollywood, you can't, and that was the line from the Hollywood Reporter review. It's like, if you're a princess, you're not allowed to age.
Right.
And that there's this long-standing tradition of having, a huge gulf, a kind of May-December gulf between the leading men and the women that play their love interests. And obviously one of the most prominent ones that comes to my mind is when, I think it's in Oblivion, Tom Cruise his love interest was a toddler when he was starring in Risky Business, right? Is this kind of thing. But to get back to your point, JJ, I think that Erin Hayes and Jayma Mays are, they're both really gifted performers. And I was glad to see that not only did the princesses have a little bit more to do, even though I wish they had had one more connective scene as mothers, because the mother-daughter relationship is not as fleshed out as the father-daughter relationship. But the fact that we got to see them as old people was another layer of fun when they are going to go out on their own, go off on their own.
I also, I think in this too, they hit on a lot of things that this movie is made for the audience that saw these first two movies and fell in love with these characters and are now dealing with these exact same things. I mean, this movie is a love letter to anyone who's ever gone through a midlife crisis. This movie is about those people who think that their destiny, their future is laid out for them. I'm 16 years old and I'm going to go to law school and I'm going to be a lawyer and I'm going to do this. And then realizing that the world, the future is, I'm trying to think of what Doc Brown says in the third one. The future is what you make it. So make it a good one. And one of the things that stuck with this entire movie to me is the idea of that what a curse it would be to know what your future holds. Because that's the problem, is these guys are constantly failing to live up to expectations, and look at what it drives them to do. Because in all honesty, in this movie they talk about taking it from their future selves, and then they find a reason to justify it. But these guys are under such pressure to be successes because of what they know that they're ultimately supposed to do. God, what a curse to live your life knowing that I didn't accomplish my goal today. God, I hope tomorrow is better. And how many people are feeling that this movie, I feel like, is going to be very, in 1989, it was relatable if you were a 17-year-old who your parents thought was a screw up because you played in a garage band. And now that same person 30 years later is feeling the same pressure because, like, you're not a great father. You didn't do that amazing thing that you thought you were going to do. The guy down the street is just a little bit better than you are because he's doing better in business, or the girl that you went to high school with opened that cosmetic industry, job, and now she's the CEO of a giant pharmaceutical company. They just can't live up to it, and they're starting to crack from the pressure. And that crack is, gosh, we might not do what we thought we were going to do. In the last 30 years have been not a waste, but an unfulfilled dream. And that, I mean, even on my way here when I was driving and I was thinking about that, and I was just like, oh my gosh, this movie is written with so much heart, and watching these two characters go through it, because they've been so pure, as Tucker said in the last podcast, you really feel for these guys and you wish you could do something to help them. To me, that added so much emotion to this movie.
Right.
And I don't know if someone, if a 16-year-old today started watching this movie, I don't know if they would have an appreciation for this as much as it would be for, for someone who has seen, grew up with these two other films. And I'll be honest, I kind of like that. In a world where we're rebooting things and recasting classic characters so that they fit a more modern movie-going audience, I kind of like the fact that they're paying the toll to the people who bought tickets to Excellent Adventure and owned Bogus Journey on VHS, Laserdisc, and DVD.
I think it was you who had said in the last podcast, JJ, too, that like this was a movie that it's actually really good that it took 29 years before we got it, because that span of time allows us to have all of that nuance that you're talking about, that the bemoaning lost youth, being able to worry about lost youth in a movie where time travel is a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Right. And I also wonder too, like if this movie had come out before Endgame, if this would have influenced Endgame at all, and like their time travel rules, because they sort of, in this, the rules of time travel is clearly just something where they're like, yeah, we're not going to worry too much about it, right? We're going to throw a bunch of ideas and rules out there, which gives us what might be my favorite line of the movie, which is Deacon, Missy, just so you know, I'm sort of an infinite being.
Right, yeah.
From Keanu, from Ted at the end there, which is one of the biggest payoffs for me in the whole movie, is that Bill and Ted, these doofy surfer dudes who love rock and roll from California become infinite beings that help save the entire reality.
Also, isn't it amazing to kind of take these characters into stock with, in a world where we discussed this last time about how, every Marvel movie, the world is at stake. And at this, it was their history report that was at stake, right? In this movie, the stakes are still there, but these are not superhuman men.
Right.
There is nothing particularly great about Bill and Ted in this movie. It's not like they have superior insight. It's not like they're super musically inclined in any way. They are just two people who believe in the future.
Right. And the audience is not really worried about whether or not reality is going to fall apart. We're worried about the futures of Bill and Ted.
Right.
Are they going to become these bad usses, or are they going to remain the pure versions of themselves that we all know and love? We're worrying about them. We want them to be okay. Which and we worry about them the same way they worry about their daughters, right? And another great, it seems like Reeves has some of the best lines in the movie when they find their daughters in hell. Like, how you doing? Oh, we're all right. We're dead and we're in hell. Yeah, but how you doing? Like a dad who just really wants to check in with his daughter and make sure everything's doing okay.
Okay, so let's talk about death for just a second, because
more than just a second.
To me, I love the way that they brought that character back in. The fact that that's the rift that they needed to heal.
It was a legal battle.
Yeah. And I think, William Sadler does a wonderful job reprising this role. And the only thing I will say about it is I thought this version of hell was Little Nicky. Reminded me of the movie Little Nicky, rather than reminding me of the truly scary hell from Bogus Journey.
Right, the sort of low budget claustrophobia that you described last time.
Yeah.
That can really get in your headspace was sort of appropriate. But one of the things that my family said right away, since we had recently watched the whole the previous two films, and so now with the whole trilogy, was that the cost of special effects has clearly gone down while the quality has kind of gone up. So you can visualize these flying bat-wing demons, flapping around in a sort of broader, deeper kind of space. So I kind of like the hell that they were in, and especially that Death, the Grim Reaper, was demoted because he wasn't supposed to bring people out of hell. And so he's still got a really nice kind of pad. He's got this kind of clean, sort of modernist space with
golden
all of his
parachute. He was given a golden parachute, basically. And also hell. It's clearly hell, but they're not undergoing extreme forms of torture. In fact, they meet those two nice demons that refer them. Oh, that was a nice group. They were a nice group, and they went down the line.
Yep.
And the funny
in our writer cameo, the Matheson Solomon cameo that we were waiting for and hoping for,
and getting even them to be running about oh, that's weird. That's a robot in hell, huh? I guess I didn't realize robots could win. And Dennis Cale McCoy goes to hell with them, and everyone who notices that there's a robot in hell has to take a moment to just think about that for a second and ask how that works.
When I hopped on IMDb after this too, I love that the writers cameos characters were dumb demon and ugly demon.
Right.
Between those two. I like that a lot, and I like kind of the sadness that they find death in. And I think, have you ever run into someone that you were friends with for a while, but then you had that falling out?
Yeah.
They did a perfect job in portraying that kind of awkwardness.
Yeah. Well, he's the kid at recess who's playing by himself. No one else is going to play with him, right? So he's playing hopscotch by himself, and he's cheating. He's playing tetherball, right? And he's speaking to people who aren't there. So he has imaginary friends that he's playing with too. And that sort of childlike notion that all he just does is play games by himself now, even though he's still busy bringing souls to the afterlife,
right?
Specifically to hell, I guess. Must never be bringing them to heaven. Because we only see him doing this, but that he's also a really sick bass player.
Yeah, right. Okay, so as we kind of wrap this thing up, to me, the future, if this becomes a franchise that extends itself, the future is with Bill and Ted's Daughters. Although I don't know what a fourth film would look like in this universe. I don't know what they would need to do to change the course of history, unless they invent someone like they did in Bogus Journey, whose sole purpose is to derail what's already been done.
It would have to be something where they revert the stakes back to low stakes again, right? Where it's you're following the daughters specifically, and they're doing something that isn't on the same level or something different. But this does feel like, you had said, did we really need a new Bill and Ted? Well, no, but this, I think, really wraps things up in a even nicer way than Bogus Journey did, right? Like, this feels like a definite ending. And with my assumption with the way that Hollywood works would be like, if there's another Bill and Ted, it is a reboot that doesn't involve any of the original people, right? Where they just sort of start over, kind of like, Dumb and Dumber tried to do and things like that, and it just doesn't work out. You need Keanu Reeves and Alex Winter.
Mhm.
They are Bill and Ted. It's really difficult to see anyone past them doing it.
Who, by the way, I think, put these characters on like they're putting on a pair of well-worn sneakers,
Right.
throughout this whole thing. I did never feel like, oh, they're just really old Bill and Ted, and they're not getting called out for their, for their style of language. They're not getting, they're being treated exactly the same way they were by like Chief Logan when they were teenagers.
Right.
And to me, these guys did a wonderful job with this. And I really think both of them coming back and bringing these characters there, it was a real gift to people who love the series. And I have no doubt that if you liked the first two Bill and Ted movies, you're going to enjoy this movie.
Right.
And, I've read a bunch of reviews about it, and the reviews all echo the same thing, which is like, this is just a fun this is a fun movie. It is all about the adventure. It is just about enjoying 91 minutes
Mm-hmm.
of really pure entertainment. And gosh, it really is perfectly timed for right now. And if the pandemic wasn't here, this movie would still be fun, but I don't think it would kind of hit me as much. Like that final scene when the world is reuniting and reality is setting itself back to where it needs to be. You just kind of think of like, yeah, we're all in this together, right? That mentality of, it doesn't matter if I live in Fargo, North Dakota, and you live in the United Kingdom and somebody else lives in the Sudan. It's all we're all connected.
Right. Quick piece of trivia before we wrap up too that I found on IMDb was that, I don't know if it's Samara or Samara, like you were saying, Greg, but let's just say Samara. Samara Weaving is actually the niece of Hugo Weaving, which is how she got on Keanu Reeves's radar. Was that because he worked with Hugo Weaving in The Matrix?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and so that was actually how she got the audition for the role. So fun little piece of IMDb trivia I just looked up.
Everything ties back to The Matrix.
Everything ties back to The Matrix. In fact, you could argue that Bill and Ted and The Matrix may share the same continuity.
Mm-hmm. Wheels within wheels.
Greg, if there was one thing about this movie that you'll take with you, whether it's a line of dialogue or a character or a moment that was sort of the highlight, what would that be for you?
Well, one thing, I don't. You have to tell me if I'm just remembering this correctly or not. But when the princesses go off on their own adventures, but they return to our present timeline, Bill and Ted, do they not say something like, we explored all these hundreds of years of possibilities, but we kind of like this one the best?
Yeah, this that they asked, did you find one where you're happy and everything works out? And they said, yeah, it's this one. Yeah.
Now that is pretty sweet. I mean, to me, that's a pretty sweet summation of again, we had referred earlier to the way that in screenwriting, Solomon and Matheson would be presented with all kinds of trope possibilities, right? The idea that Bill and Ted could have a crisis in their friendship, but they resist that. the princesses have stayed with Bill and Ted, and that's why I love the couples counseling sequence. Jillian Bell is just so incredibly funny. No matter what she's given, she always imbues it with a great deal of believable. Her reactions are always so believable to me. So I like this idea that the princesses have, against all odds, they've been taken out of medieval Europe, but they have built these relationships with Bill and Ted that are reflective of what you have described in the previous podcast and this one about Bill and Ted's purity as characters and as the way they think about each other as more than friends. They live next door to each other and that kind of stuff. So that's my answer.
That's nice. For me, it's Dennis Caleb McCoy. I love Dennis. I love Dennis Caleb McCoy. My plan is to go back and just rewatch all of his scenes. Because I didn't see it coming, right? Like I thought that there was just going to be this murder bot after them, and that would be the through line. But they twist and turn that pretty quickly. And when he gets attacked by the prison members, and then when he accidentally sends Captain Logan to hell, and then lasers the daughters and all of the famous musicians, and then has to argue with Bill and Ted who want them to kill them so that they can go save their daughters, which is a really, I think that might be one of the true testament to Bill and Ted's character is like they're supposed to save reality. They have the song in their hand, but when they find out their daughters have been sent to hell, they say no. They break the USB drive and they say, you need to kill us right now. Like this is now the most important thing. So them as fathers is the most important thing to them, more important than being the wild stallions. And when they, it's telegraphed fairly early on in the movie that, the reveal is not a surprise, that it's their daughters who are the two that actually are the ones that make the song. But the moment when Bill and Ted realize it and how happy they are, and how excited they are and how proud they are that it's their daughters that are doing it, is a part of their characters that really spoke to me too. Like their greatest accomplishment, they realize, is not that they make this song, but it's that they're dads.
Yeah,
that's a very sweet way to put that too, Tucker. Greg, we've gone through 3 Bill and Ted movies, plus all of the pop culture stuff surrounding it. And now I think there's only one way to end this podcast, and that's be excellent to each other.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us again, Greg. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
That's going to wrap it up for today's show. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to help us continue to produce new episodes each week, visit jjmeetsworld.com, where you can donate to our Patreon, pick up some swag at the merch shop, or follow our link to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, all the sites the cool kids are using these days. JJ Meets World is produced every week by Tucker Lucas. You can find out more about Tucker's work by visiting moonbasemaria.com. If you want to get in touch with your host with the most, check out linebenders.com, where you can find direct contact info for JJ or booking information. Here's my impression of like an air guitar, right? Beely, 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 bee.